It happened on a cold Wednesday morning in a busy community shelter in Chicago. The volunteers were setting out breakfast. The room was full of people, some sitting quietly with their trays, some staring at the floor, some just grateful to be somewhere warm. It was a normal morning, the kind the shelter staff had seen hundreds of times before. Then a little girl walked in with her mother. She was about 5 years old. Small coat. 2 braids. A stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She looked around the room with the wide, calm eyes that young children have, the ones that haven't yet learned to look away from things. She saw the people at the tables. She saw the volunteers in their aprons. And then she saw a man sitting alone in the corner, unshaven, tired, a paper cup of coffee held in both hands like it was the warmest thing he owned. She stopped walking. Her mother kept moving for 2 steps before she realized her daughter wasn't beside her anymore. The little girl was still looking at the man in the corner. Then she pulled free of her mother's hand, walked straight across the room, and said one word. One word that stopped every conversation in that shelter cold. Daddy. The little girl's name was Rosie. She was 5 years and 4 months old, according to her mother, who told the shelter coordinator this detail later in a trembling voice as if the exactness of it mattered, as if 4 months was the part that explained something. Rosie's mother was named Claire. She was 32, with dark circles under her eyes and the careful, controlled manner of a person who had been holding things together through sheer will for a very long time. She and Rosie had come to the shelter that morning not for breakfast, but because Claire was applying for emergency housing assistance. She had a folder of documents under her arm. She had rehearsed what she was going to say. She had not planned for this. The man in the corner, the one Rosie had walked up to, was named Marcus. The shelter staff knew him. He had been coming in for 8 months. He was 41 years old, quiet, polite, and gave nobody any trouble. He always sat in the same corner. He always arrived just before breakfast and left just after. Nobody knew much about his life before the shelter. He didn't talk about it. People there generally understood that the past was a private place. But now a 5-year-old girl was standing in front of him with her stuffed rabbit, looking up at him with complete certainty. And the whole room was waiting. Marcus looked down at the little girl. His expression was hard to read, surprise, yes, but something else underneath it. Something careful. He glanced up at Claire, who had followed her daughter across the room and was now standing a few feet back, her folder clutched to her chest, her face pale. Rosie, Claire said softly. Rosie, sweetheart, come here. But Rosie didn't move. She was still looking at Marcus with those steady, trusting eyes. You look like my daddy, she said. It was a simple statement. Completely matter of fact. The way children say things that land like stones in still water. Marcus set his paper cup down slowly. He looked at the little girl, and then at her mother again. I'm sorry, Claire said quickly. Her voice was tight. She doesn't, I'm so sorry. She stopped. Took a breath. Her father passed away 8 months ago. The room, which had already gone quiet, seemed to go quieter still. Marcus nodded once. Slowly. His jaw moved slightly, like he was deciding something. Then he looked back at Rosie and said, in a low, gentle voice, What's your rabbit's name? Rosie looked down at the stuffed animal under her arm. Gerald, she said. That's a good name, Marcus said. And somehow, in that moment, the worst of the tension in the room let out one long, slow breath. Claire sat down at the table nearest to Marcus, not because she had planned to, but because Rosie had already climbed into the chair across from him and shown no intention of leaving. A volunteer quietly brought them both breakfast trays. Claire thanked her without quite looking up. For a few minutes, nobody said much. Rosie ate her toast and talked to Gerald in a low murmur. Marcus drank his coffee. Claire held her folder and tried to find the equilibrium she had walked in with, which felt very far away now. Then Rosie looked up and said, "My daddy used to hold his coffee like that. With both hands." Marcus looked down at his cup. He was, in fact, holding it with both hands. Claire made a small sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else entirely. "I'm sorry about your husband," Marcus said to her. His voice was quiet and direct. Not uncomfortable, the way people sometimes were around grief, not rushing to fill it with words. He just said it clearly, and left space for it to be true. Claire looked at him properly for the first time. "Thank you," she said. She told him a little then. Not everything, just the outline. James had died of a sudden cardiac event 8 months ago. He was 35. He had been healthy, as far as anyone knew. It had been completely without warning. Marcus listened. He didn't offer advice. He didn't say everything happened for a reason. He just listened. Rosie finished her toast and leaned her elbows on the table. "Do you have a little girl?" she asked him. The question landed differently than Rosie meant it to. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Claire watched something move behind his eyes, a door opening briefly and then closing again. "I did," he said. "A long time ago." Rosie considered this. "Where did she go?" "Rosie," Claire said gently. "It's all right," Marcus said. He looked at Rosie with a steadiness that seemed to cost him something. "She grew up," he said. "And I wasn't there the way I should have been." It was an honest answer. More honest, probably, than the question had asked for. But something about Rosie had pulled it out of him, that fearless, open attention of hers that didn't know how to be anything other than direct. Claire studied him. She was a careful person by nature, and she had become more careful since James died. She had learned to watch people's eyes when they spoke, because she had found that faces could be arranged, but eyes were harder to manage. Marcus's eyes, she thought, were sad in a way that wasn't fresh. It was old sadness. The kind that had been carried so long it had simply become part of the person. She understood that kind of sad. She was just starting to learn it herself. They stayed at the table longer than Claire had intended. Long after breakfast was cleared. She eventually remembered her folder of documents and the housing appointment she had come for, and she excused herself to speak to the coordinator. But Rosie stayed at the table with Marcus and showed him Gerald's ear, which had a small tear in it that needed fixing. Claire came back to the shelter the following week. She told herself it was because the housing application needed a follow-up document delivered in person. That was true. But she had also thought about Marcus on the bus ride home the week before, and again on 2 evenings after that, and she hadn't entirely understood why. He was there, in the same corner, with the same paper cup. Rosie recognized him immediately and waved across the room like greeting an old friend. Marcus raised his cup slightly in return. Over the following weeks, a quiet pattern formed. Claire had reasons to visit the shelter regularly. The housing process was slow and bureaucratic and required patience she had to manufacture from somewhere. And each time, they would end up at the same table for a while. She learned more about him gradually, the way you learn about someone who measures out their words carefully. His name was Marcus Webb. He had grown up in Detroit. He had trained as an electrician. He had a daughter named Sophie who would be 23 now. He had lost contact with her when she was 12, after his marriage ended and a long, dark period took hold of him, years lost to addiction, to instability, to the particular shame that makes a person disappear rather than ask for help. He had been sober for 3 years. He had been trying, quietly and without any expectation of reward, to rebuild something. He wasn't sure exactly what yet. Claire told him things in return. About James. About Rosie. About how strange it was to keep waking up in a life that looked the same from the outside but felt completely different on the inside. One afternoon, Rosie fell asleep on the chair beside her mother, her head on her folded arms, Gerald tucked under her cheek. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "She's going to be all right, you know." Claire looked at her daughter. "I hope so." "She will," he said. "She already knows how to walk toward things instead of away from them. That takes most people a lifetime to learn." Claire looked at him. "Did you learn it?" He thought about that. "I'm trying," he said. There was a silence that felt honest rather than awkward. "I've been thinking about looking for Sophie," he said. He hadn't said his daughter's name out loud to anyone in a very long time. The word came out slightly rough, like something taken out of storage. "I don't know if she'd want to hear from me." "You won't know until you try," Claire said. Then she paused. "I know that's easy to say." "No," he said. "It's the right thing to say. Easy and right aren't the same." Claire smiled at that. It was a small smile, but it was real. The kind she hadn't felt arrive on her face naturally in a while. She didn't examine it too closely. She just let it be there. The housing application came through in early spring. Claire and Rosie were offered a small apartment 20 minutes from the shelter. The day she picked up the keys, she stopped by the shelter to tell Marcus. She wasn't sure why it felt important to tell him specifically, but it did. He was in his corner. She sat down and slid the key across the table. "We got a place," she said. He picked up the key and looked at it for a moment. Then he set it back down and said, "Good. Rosie needs a home." "So do you," Claire said. He was quiet. "Have you looked into the transitional housing program here?" she asked. She had spoken to one of the coordinators the week before. Not casually. Deliberately. He looked up at her. "They have a placement in 2 weeks," she said. "I mentioned your name. They said you'd be a strong candidate. You just have to say yes." He was still for a long moment. Then he said, "Why did you do that?" Claire considered her answer. "Because Rosie walked across a room toward you when most people would have looked the other way," she said. "And I've decided she has better instincts than I do." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, more like the expression that comes just before one. The quiet arrival of something that had been a long time on its way. "Tell them yes," he said. Marcus moved into the transitional housing program on a Thursday in April. It was a small room. Clean white walls, a single window, a bed with a blue blanket. The kind of room that was modest and decent and asked nothing from you except that you show up each day and try. He had shown up. He was trying. With the help of a caseworker at the shelter, he sent a letter to Sophie. He found her through her mother, who, to his surprise, responded within a week. Sophie was living in Minneapolis. She was a teacher. She was married. She didn't reply to the letter right away. He had expected that. He waited. 6 weeks later, she called. The conversation was short and careful. There were things in it that hurt, because the truth between them required honesty to work with, and honesty sometimes hurt. But at the end of it, Sophie said, "I'm not ready to meet yet. But I'm glad you called." That was enough. That was more than he had expected. He called Claire that evening. She had given him her number months ago, for shelter updates, they had told themselves, and he told her about the conversation. She listened to the whole thing. When he finished, she said, "That was brave." "No," he said. "It was just necessary. I should have done it a long time ago." "Sometimes necessary and brave are the same thing," she said. He thought about that for a long time after they hung up. One Sunday morning, Claire brought Rosie back to the shelter for a volunteer breakfast they had been invited to by the coordinator. It was a community event, a way of bringing together the people who had passed through and the people who still came. Marcus was there. He was wearing a clean shirt. He was helping carry trays from the kitchen, talking easily with one of the regular volunteers. He looked different, not dramatically, not like a movie transformation, but different in the specific way that people look when they have stopped fighting themselves. Rosie spotted him across the room. She walked straight toward him, exactly as she had that first cold Wednesday morning, same braids, same rabbit, same fearless stride. "Gerald's ear is fixed," she announced, holding the rabbit up for inspection. Marcus looked at the ear, which had been neatly stitched by Claire one evening with a needle and thread. "Good as new," he said seriously. "I told him you said he had a good name," Rosie added. He was happy. Marcus crouched down to her level. "You know something, Rosie," he said. "You changed things. You walking across that room, you changed things for me." Rosie thought about this in the direct way she thought about everything. "Mommy says sometimes people need someone to walk toward them," she said. "Because they've forgotten they're worth walking toward." The room around them was warm and full of quiet noise, trays and voices and the ordinary sounds of people being fed and cared for. Marcus stood up and looked across at Claire, who was watching from a few feet away with that small, real smile. Some rooms go silent because something painful just happened. But some rooms go silent because something true just walked in. Rosie had done both.